I'm a grateful believer of Jesus Christ. I struggle with codependency, bulimia, and feelings of rejection, and my name is Cora. Before Celebrate Recovery, I was full of shame, self loathing, self punishment, in denial, and I felt rejected. I believed that if people knew the real me, the things I had done, and the things that had been done to me, they would look at me with disgust. I didn't like myself. I didn't like the way I looked. I had constant negative self talk, and I stuffed deep down all of the pain that I carried, trying to hide it, ignore it, and run away from it. When I look back at the major events of my life, I can see that a lot of my sin was rooted in my feelings of rejection. I was born in the provinces of the Philippines. When I was 2 months old, my biological father was killed by another man in a fight over a woman. This fight was not over my mom, who was married to my father at that time. In the Philippines, it's the custom for extended families to live together, such as parents, their children, eventually their spouses, etc. When my father was killed, my paternal grandparents wanted nothing to do with my mom, my older sister, and me. I don't know the reasons why. My mom just told me that they never liked her or us. My father's death and the treatment from my paternal grandparents was the beginning of the rejection that I felt for most of my life. My mom needed to make money to raise me and my sister, but where we lived, there was no work. She left us in the care of her family and went to another island in the Philippines, thousands of miles away, to work and send money home to help take care of us. I don't know if she was able to come back and visit. During this time, she met and began dating an American who was in the Navy. After 4 months, his tour of duty was over and his ship left the Philippines. My mom believed that she would never see him again. After a couple of months, he called my mom and told her that he loved her and wanted to marry her and bring her to the States. Eventually, all three of us were on a plane to California where he was stationed. At that time, I was 3 years old and my sister was 4. My sister and I met my dad for the very first time when we got off the airplane. My sister and I had to learn English so that we could start school, so we were not allowed to speak Tagalog, our native language. I did okay learning English, but my sister struggled with it and was in speech classes until 5th grade. She was even held back in kindergarten, so we ended up being in the same grade together. My mom and dad had 2 sons. My mom didn't drive and didn't work. Because of my dad being in the Navy, he would be gone on a ship for several months at a time and be home for a couple of months and then be gone again. He stayed in the Navy for 20 years, so my whole childhood was him leaving and coming back with dozens of moves, dozens of schools, dozens of houses, having lived in several different countries. My family was stationed in Japan when I was 4. During this time, I was sexually abused by the son of one of my mom's friends. I don't know his name, his age, or what he looked like. I honestly don't remember how many times it happened. I didn't remember any of it until I was a preteen. I have memories of being in a bedroom and being made to do things that I didn't understand. When I finally did remember years later, I never spoke about it with anyone. I didn't think anyone would believe me, and I somehow felt that I had done something to make that boy do those things to me, like it was my fault. This began the cycle of shame, denial, and suppressing feelings. Growing up, I felt the rejection of looking different from everyone else. I had dark skin, and kids would make fun of my slanted eyes. Moving every 3 or 4 years meant leaving my friends and having to be the new kid in class over and over again. It was so mortifying to me to be the new kid in class and the other kids asking me and my sister, "Are you guys Chinese or Japanese? Where are you from? Do you speak another language?" I just wanted to blend in and be like the other kids. It felt like rejection upon rejection for me. Because we were so young when we left the Philippines and we had to learn a new language, my sister and I had no recollection of coming to the States. I grew up thinking my dad was my biological dad. When I was 10, I found a shot record with my first name but a different last name. It had my birth date, but I didn't think it could be mine. I showed it to my mom and asked her who that person was. She told me that it was me. I told her it couldn't be because that wasn't my last name. She then began to tell me about my biological dad, how he died, how his family didn't want us, how she met my dad, and how they married. I felt very confused. How could I not know that this man was not my dad? Then I became very angry. I felt like my parents had lied to me my whole life. I asked my mom when were they going to tell me all of this. She said she was waiting until she thought we would be ready to hear it. Looking back on this as an adult and now as a parent, I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for my mom to have that conversation with me. But as a 10-year-old, all I could think was that my whole life was a lie. Fast forward a few years. When I was 15, my dad got stationed in White Sands, New Mexico. I started skipping school, smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, shoplifting. I tried to run away. And in the middle of all that chaos, I lost my virginity. I had lost myself, and I didn't know how to get back. I was raised Catholic, and my mom took us to church almost every Sunday, but I didn't know Jesus. My parents were good parents. They taught their children to be respectful. But I chose to do what I was doing despite all of that. I was so out of control, my parents decided that I needed to live with my grandparents who lived in Rantoul. I agreed to go. Leaving my family, especially my sister and my two brothers, was very difficult for me. But everyone thought that a change in environment would be good for me. Even though this circumstance was totally because of my actions, this still felt like a rejection to me. For the first time in my life, I was away from my family, hundreds of miles away. Instead of being the new kid with my siblings, I was totally on my own. I found friends that were basically the same as the friends I had just left. I was going out, still smoking marijuana, and still drinking. My dad being gone a lot, he was emotionally distant to his kids. I don't remember my dad ever telling me he loved me. Even to this day, I will tell my dad that I love him, but his reply is always okay. I think that with the knowledge of what happened to my biological dad and the lack of emotions my dad showed to me, this was part of my need to feel wanted and to feel like I fit in somewhere. My dad retired from the Navy about a year after I got to Rantoul, and the rest of my family moved here. I met my first husband, an airman stationed at Chinook, when I was 17, just a few short months before my high school graduation. 6 days after I turned 18, we got married. Things for us were troubled from the start. I quickly found out that he was an alcoholic. Just 2 weeks after being married, he left me in our new apartment and went out drinking and didn't come home until the next morning. I didn't know what to do or what was going on. I had never been around an alcoholic before. I had seen and done a lot in my few short years, but I was still only 18 and very naive. About a month into our marriage, I began getting phone calls from a woman. She was the wife of one of his bosses, claiming that she was having sex with my husband. My husband always had an explanation for the nights he was out drinking, and he had an explanation for why this woman would be telling lies about him. This type of thing happened the entire 9 years we were married. I wanted to believe that the man who loved me would never do the things that all of these people were telling me he did. I was in denial for most of our marriage. After 4 months of marriage, we moved to Germany and lived there for 3 years. We eventually were stationed in Oklahoma City for 2 years and also in Japan for 3 years. I was isolated from my family because of us always being stationed so far away. I only had him. My husband was very controlling of me, what I should wear, who I could have as friends, and where I could go. Controlling me was not hard to do because I was so young and so dependent on him. Not only was he an alcoholic and habitually cheating on me, but he was also addicted to sex and pornography. I had never been exposed to pornography until I was married. He would make me do things sexually, things that I never imagined. He would take me to dark, evil places and have me watch pornography and do things with him. I would tell him that I didn't want to do these things, but he would tell me that he was my husband and that he should be able to do whatever he wanted with my body. My life was a nightmare. It wasn't until years later, while in counseling, did I realize that what I had gone through was sexual abuse. I had no one to talk to, but even if I did, I don't know if I would have shared any of it. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I stuffed everything that I was going through. Because I felt so out of control about everything, my life, my own body, I began to binge and purge. I became bulimic. I finally found something I could control, my food. If I ate too much or felt like I was gaining weight, I could just make myself throw up. It was also a form of punishment for me. If I was good enough, if I looked better, if I was skinnier, then my husband wouldn't cheat on me. He wouldn't need a drink. He wouldn't need to use sex against me. If I couldn't control what he did to my body, I could control what I put in my body or just purge it out. I was a wreck. I finally reached the point where I felt that if I stayed married to him, I was going to die. I was already dying emotionally, but physically I didn't know how much longer I would last. At that time, I weighed 30 pounds less than what I do now. Our arguments were always volatile, but it wasn't until after I told him that I was leaving that he became physical towards me. When I told him I was leaving him, he told me that I wouldn't be able to find somebody who would want me. I believed him. But after 9 years of marriage, I left and came back home to my parents, who still lived in Rantoul. I was depressed, bulimic. I had so many issues that I needed to work on, but I stuffed it all. I thought that if I never spoke about the things that I went through, I would be okay. No one would have to know. Besides, I was ashamed of it all. I didn't want to share any of it. I felt like it was all my fault because I had allowed all of it for all of those years. So I put it all behind me, or so I thought. Instead of seeking help with a counselor or taking time to allow myself to heal, I immediately went out on the bar scene. I had not been in control of my life for 9 years. I had this so-called newfound freedom. But just 2 short months after leaving my first husband, while I was still married, I met my now second ex-husband. I wasn't healed. I had no business being in another relationship. But I felt like I needed to have someone who could make me feel better about myself. My relationship with my second husband was rocky from the start. Before we were married, we broke up and got back together several times. Not only did I still have all of my undealt issues from my first marriage, but I also had anger issues, and so did he. He also had issues from his parents' divorce, which happened when he was 6, but we still got married after 2 years of being together. My mom died in a car accident 2 years after I married my second husband. I thought I had known grief because of everything I went through in my first marriage. I did not. My world was shattered. My mom was the rock of our family. All of us were numb, especially my dad. Just 6 months after my mom died, I found out I was pregnant. I was told in my mid-20s that I would never have children. I was overjoyed, but I also grieved the fact that my children would never know their grandmother. Before I got pregnant, my husband and I drank a lot, almost every weekend. But that all changed for me when I got pregnant. My focus changed. I had a child, one I never thought I would have, that needed me. Things were okay with my husband and I at this point. We had a lot of arguments, but that was normal for us. That didn't change after the birth of my first son. From the beginning of our relationship, we had never been able to communicate our issues to each other in a healthy way. Then 3 years later, I got pregnant again. After having 2 sons, I slowed down a lot on my partying and drinking, but it continued to increase for my husband. It eventually got to the point where he was going out with his friends, leaving me and my sons at home. There were many nights that he would leave and I couldn't get a hold of him. I didn't know where he was or what he was doing. I had plenty of ideas, though. I had already been through this in my first marriage. He would eventually come home the next day with no explanation, no excuse. I wouldn't have believed him anyway. Things were spiraling and getting worse for us. I found Jesus in 2008 and was baptized June 7th, 2009. I have not looked back since. I started going to Christian Life Church because my second marriage was in trouble, and I felt an emptiness inside of me, an emptiness that only God could fill. When I initially began going to church, my husband was so angry about it. I think he felt like I was replacing him with Jesus. I had a choice to give up my relationship with God so that I could appease my husband. I chose God, not because I didn't love my husband, but because I loved my husband. He didn't understand. One night while I was reading my Bible, praying and crying about the state of my marriage, I came across this verse for the very first time. Isaiah 54:10. For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. I sobbed when I read that verse. I knew then that no matter what my circumstances were, no matter what happened, God loved me. I could have peace even in the middle of chaos because God loved me. He even has compassion for me. He cares about everything that we go through. That verse has carried me through so many difficult times. The breakdown of my second marriage happened years before my husband left me. When we would fight, he would give me the silent treatment. What used to be 1 or 2 days of not talking to me eventually turned into weeks at a time. If I could count up all of the time that I was ignored, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it added up to several months, maybe even a year. I was miserable, but no one knew that. Home is the place where you are supposed to escape from the world. It's supposed to be a sanctuary. I was very good at putting on my mask when I was around other people. I had a lot of experience doing that my whole life. My husband continued to party and drink heavily. The only reason he eventually stopped drinking for a few years was because of a DUI. I was heartbroken that I had to wake up my 8 and 5-year-old at the time at 3 a.m. and take them to the police station and pick up their dad. He lost his license, and I had to take him back and forth to work, to court, to everything for a year. This didn't affect just me because this meant having to wake up the boys extra early to make sure he got to work by 6 a.m. Things got better, but it was temporary. The vicious cycle of arguing and not talking just kept going. Eventually, things became so bad that we were just roommates. He slept on the couch for the last 4 years of our marriage. I begged him, I cried, I got angry with him. I repented to him and asked his forgiveness on the things I had done wrong. I tried everything I could to get him to be a husband to me again. I even went to counseling on my own for a year. Nothing worked. He had checked out. By this point, I had dealt with the rejection of not being wanted as a wife emotionally and physically for several years. My husband told me in November of 2016, just 1 month before our 16-year anniversary, that he didn't want to be married to me anymore. I was heartbroken, but I was not surprised. We agreed that we didn't want to tell the boys at that time because the holidays were right around the corner. So with my heart breaking in what felt like a million pieces, I had to pretend that everything was okay that last Thanksgiving and Christmas together as a family. I told no one what was going on, not even my family. I carried that burden alone for several months. I was numb. I felt shame, rejection. I was depressed. I had eventually gotten a handle on my bulimia on my own. So I thought, a couple of years after the end of my first marriage. I had struggled with it from time to time, but it was an old friend to me and came back during this time. Job 2:10. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This verse has helped me to realize that everything happens in our lives. All of the good and all of the bad goes through God's hands first. Bad things don't happen because God is trying to punish us. Bad things happen because we live in a sin-filled world. But God does expect us to walk through difficult times, still praising him, still giving him glory. In February of 2017, my husband moved out of the house. I couldn't sleep. I began to have panic attacks. My chest hurt all of the time. Then a few months after leaving the house, I found out he had a girlfriend. Up until that point, a part of me was still hopeful that maybe, just maybe, we would be able to work things out. That door slammed shut for me. Philippians 4:6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. During all of this, I kept drawing closer and closer to the Lord. I stayed up many nights praying in the Spirit. Sometimes I didn't even have any words, I just cried. But I knew that God recognized my tears as prayers. I walked in to celebrate recovery in October of 2017. I thought that I was only coming because I was hurting from my second failed marriage. But then Alta became my sponsor and I started working the step study. This began the slow and very, very painful process of peeling back the layers of hurt, shame, and rejection that I had been running from my whole life. Doing the step study forced me to stand still and allow all of my pain, past and present, to wash over me. I had to process all of it. I had to walk through it. I had to allow myself to feel everything. I even had to give myself permission to cry about all of it. But this also allowed true healing to begin in me. Healing that at first I didn't know I needed, but healing that has completely freed me, changed me, and given me hope. Jesus and Celebrate Recovery have changed my life. I walk in true freedom because of it. I still stumble, make mistakes, even step backwards. But I have the steps to go back to that help me process, evaluate, and then move forward. I don't have to hide when I'm in pain. I don't have to stuff my feelings. I can speak life into my situations instead of focusing on my problems. Jeremiah 31:3. The Lord appeared to him from far away. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have continued my faithfulness to you. Recently, I was thinking about how I had never had a relationship with a man where I felt truly loved for the person that I am, where I felt valued, where I felt cherished, where I was honored, even where I felt safe. But then the Holy Spirit revealed to me that God loves me, values me, cherishes me, and protects me. What I've been looking for from other people, God has already given to me over and over again, even though I don't deserve it and can never earn it. Joel 2:25. I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army which I sent among you. I could choose to be bitter and unforgiving about all of the things that I've walked through in my life. And I think most people would tell me that they wouldn't blame me for doing that. But God has cared for me in everything that I've walked through. God has provided for me in ways that I couldn't imagine. God gives me true hope that everything I've gone through will be for his glory. God has restored me to a person who looks forward to the future, as uncertain as it may seem at this time. But I know with certainty that God will be there. And so I'll end with this verse. Romans 8:26-28. Meanwhile, the moment we get tired in the waiting, God's Spirit is right alongside helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, it doesn't matter. He does our praying in and for us, making prayer out of our wordless sighs, our aching groans. He knows us far better than we know ourselves, knows our pregnant condition, and keeps us present before God. That's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good. Thank you for letting me share.